Just turn to the person beside you and say, you look fantastic this morning. Great. Well, that's enough encouragement, please. You're in church or something. It's brilliant to be here. I've been here a few times, so I feel like I'm amongst friends, and it's great to see so many familiar faces. And I'm really encouraged to hear. I keep up to date with what you guys are doing as a church on social media, and just all the stuff that you're involved in. It's so inspiring to see you guys constantly wanting to give yourself on behalf of those that feel broken and marginalized in Bristol. So well done. Thank you so much for having us. We feel a real privilege to be here. Just a couple of things, if you're interested. I've written a number of books, and I'm always a little bit embarrassed about telling people about my books. And then I was away with some other church leaders this week, and they said, how long does it take you to write a book? And it takes me about a year. And blood, sweat, tears, research, crying. And you wouldn't do that if you didn't feel like it wasn't an important message for the church. And so I have put a lot of my heart and passion into these, and I do get embarrassed about it, but Conspiracy and Insignificance, the first book I wrote, and it really is that I believe that the kingdom of God isn't just about the big and the spectacular. I believe it's about small stands of justice and compassion, and it tells that story. There's another one back there called No Ceiling to Hope, which I wrote post-Trump, post-refugee, all those issues. But it's almost like if anyone needs anything today, it's a sense of hope, isn't it? That sense of to reimagine what life could be, not just to go with the status quo. And then my last book, When Faith Gets Shaken. I don't know if anyone's read this. There's a few people who read this book. It seems to have been read by a few people. This is just about what happens when life gets really tough. How can you find God in the midst of anxiety and depression and anger and guilt and all those things that happens? In fact, a name drop, I hope you catch his name as it drops. I was with Sir Cliff Richard yesterday, and I gave him a copy and just said, we're praying for you. Because there is a guy that has been absolutely hammered in the last couple of years. And then what we did is, because this went so well, we turned it into a DVD so people can discuss the issues in small groups. So it's 6 sessions. There's an interview of about 10 minutes, or just interviewing some inspiring people about how they found faith in the midst. Worst case scenario is you give a $5 to charity. Best case scenario, you get really blessed by it. So do check those out. I want to tell you a story. The story is of a lady called Teresa. Teresa had 2 alcoholic parents. Her childhood was just a neglected fog of memories. In fact, her parents, they were quite wealthy. They weren't poor, but because of their alcoholism, she used to go through cupboards on her hands and knees from 3 upwards trying to find food. Photos exist of Teresa, but when they look at them, she sees her wearing unwashed clothes, her hair's matted, and she looks like an orphan. She lived in a nice house, but she lived in complete loneliness. In the 5th grade, she discovered something. She discovered she was one of those rare people that enjoys maths and English. And so she used to hide away in the library, studying with her books, trying to forget her parents. Graduation came, and she was so full of pride. This was the moment where actually she was going to be worth something. At graduation day, the principal stood up and he made that announcement. We're not going to clap until everyone's got their certificate. And then at the end, we're going to give everyone a massive clap. And Teresa thought, that's great, because I'm not even sure my mum and dad are going to be here. But the problem was the parents just couldn't help themselves. Every time their kid came up on stage, there was a massive, massive round of applause. Teresa started thinking, oh no, when I get up there on stage, no one's going to clap. And then suddenly she saw her dad at the back of the hall, but he was drunk. She got up. She walked in silence across the stage, her high heels echoing around the hall, and she took her certificate and she sat down completely and utterly humiliated. She placed her robe, her diploma, and her honor cord in the bin as she walked away home in tears. She went through college, still incredibly intelligent, When it got to college graduation, she decided that she was going to skip that, thank you very much. She didn't want to go through that again. But then she went to law school, and she did even better. She got an amazing degree with honors. So it came to that graduation, and she thinks, what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to pay some teenagers to clap for me, so when I go up on the stage, that I'm not going to have to go through that moment again. It was her time. The teenagers missed their cue. For the second time in her life, Teresa walked across the stage in silence. Flashback from the previous memory. The hurt, the shame, the loneliness, everything started coming back. That night, she started on the streets and became an alcoholic herself. She lived in cars, she lived in shelters, she slept with men for drinks and food. What she was trying to do is she was trying to numb the pain that she was going through. And though that may be an extreme story, you know what? All of us numb pain in some way. It might be for some of us, it might be alcohol, it might be TV, or it might be our phones. It may be that we want to escape the reality of what's going on in our lives. It may be retail therapy, but actually what we do is we don't often face the pain. We want to escape it some way. Teresa, one morning after nearly dying of exposure, she went on an AA course, Alcoholics Anonymous, and she got a job, and she met this wonderful guy who she got married to called John. And he decided to throw her a 35th birthday party. And at the 35th birthday party, what he did is he invited all her friends along from the AA classes, and they played games that she'd never played in her childhood, like, you know, put the tail on the donkey and pass the parcel, and just try to relive those moments to restore some of the memories that she had lost through the neglected childhood. And then her husband said, I want you to all gather around the TV set. He'd made this incredible film about her, and there was people saying how much they loved her. But then it came to the point of her graduation. And she's like, what has he done? She's looking at her younger self. As she walks across the stage, she winces, waiting for the silence. But instead of the silence, there were loud cheers. Yes, Teresa, go on, Teresa. It wasn't from the people in the room. Her husband was a recording engineer. He had recorded his voice in 100 different locations with 100 different tones, saying, yes, Teresa, amazing Teresa, you are absolutely brilliant. Teresa felt that she was marginalized, that she was broken. Isn't our job to go to those people who feel marginalized, who feel broken, and find the brokenness within our community, but also to address the brokenness in ourselves? Jesus' mission, you know these very common verses. Luke 4, it says these words. Let me read them to you out of the Message version. Jesus returned to Galilee, powerful in the Spirit. News of him spread throughout the countryside. He taught in their meeting places to everyone to acclaim and pleasure. He went to Nazareth, where he'd been reared. As he did on the Sabbath, he went to the meeting place. When he stood up to read, he was handed the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. Unrolling the scroll, he found the place where it was written, God's Spirit is on me. He's chosen me to preach the message of good news to the poor, sent me to announce pardon to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the burdened and battered free, to announce this is God's year to act. He rolled up the scroll, handed it back to the assistant and sat down. Every eye in the place was on him, intent. And then he started in. You've just heard the scripture make history. It came true just now in this place. Jesus always went to those that were oppressed. We need to go to those who are oppressed. We need to go to those who are stigmatized. You know, Jesus went to the tax collector, didn't he? The tax collectors in those times, they were traitor in the eyes of the Jewish people. They were collecting money from people that were already poor, for heaven's sake, and then taking money from themselves. They weren't allowed in the synagogues. To eat with someone in first century Palestine and Israel was an incredible, intimate affair. It's something you only did with your closest friends. No true Israelite would ever consider eating with a tax collector. Jesus says, Zacchaeus, come down and go into your house for tea. John 4, the Samaritan woman, she was at the well in the middle of the day. Why? Because she was ashamed. What does shame push us to do that we wouldn't normally do? But Jesus had this amazing ability to see the potential of someone who is incredibly, incredibly broken. I want to read you something now. This is an onlooker looking at the story of a woman caught in adultery. I love this. It says this. This is the story of the onlooker. I left the crowd early. I didn't think I could stomach another stoning. I'd seen too many in my lifetime, but I was intrigued with this Jesus person. I circled around to watch as one by one each person left the woman until she was standing alone. I'll never forget the look on her face, distant, blank, no defiance left in her. It was obvious she'd given up. Her shoulders were slumped forward. Her face looked old. Deep lines of pain itched upon it. She was not humiliated by this experience. She was beyond humiliation. She was no stranger for the disman of Maine. She'd suffered abuse before, most of her life really. Suffering abuse was her companion, her place. I watched her standing there for what seemed hours. The silence was deafening. You could actually hear the footsteps of those leaving. She stood there with Jesus. He knelt down while all this was happening, writing in the sand. He looked straight ahead. She looked straight ahead, ignoring him, ignoring all of us. But when everyone had left, I could see her look ever so slightly, first to the left and then to the right. When she realized she was alone, I could see the amazed look on her face. She couldn't believe it. All of her accusers were gone. I swear to you, it looked as if the wrinkles on her face suddenly disappeared. Her eyes, no longer dull and colorless, seemed to flash in the desert sun. She looked at him for the first time, trying to take him all in, trying to understand the strange man who's acted like no man she's ever met. He said something to her. I couldn't hear what he said, but then I noticed the tears. They came slowly at first, and then they drowned her face in a lifetime of sorrow. She cried a long time as if her soul was cleansing itself. I'll never forget what Jesus did next. He stood facing her, staring at her tear-soaked face. She was standing much straighter now, her shoulders upright and strong. He reached down to her and gently, tenderly wiped the tears from her face. She stopped crying. He cupped her face in his hands and bent down and kissed her on the forehead. He held her face for a very long time, not really looking at her, but through her, as if he was looking at her heart, at all the scars on her soul. It was as if he was healing her soul, looking her sin away. Then abruptly, he let go of the face, turned to leave, turned back, and winked. Jesus went to the stigmatized. He went to the broken. Who are the most stigmatized today? The stigmatized today often are people challenging, struggling with mental health challenges. Church, very lonely place to be if you struggle in that. Refugees, stigmatized today. Whatever your politics, it isn't right what's going on. And sometimes with the issues around mental health, I think we treat mental health the way we treat physical health. We think you can solve it through a prayer line. And actually what people really need if they're struggling with mental health is they need company and they need community and they need people to come alongside. People who feel stigmatized today are often people like me who've been prayed for a million different times to be healed physically and have never been healed. And every time I go forward, it's emotionally exhausting to ask for prayer yet again. It's not always the Hollywood film. It's not always the happy ending. But that's the story the pastor seems to want to hear the whole time. I think God does stuff in our brokenness. There's this lovely illustration which I love. It's called kintsugi art. I don't know if you've come across this. So basically, if you take a cracked bowl, what you can do is you can mend it with super glue. And the whole idea of mending it with super glue is you hide the cracks. You pretend it's not broken. In Japan, the word kintsugi stands for golden joinery. They put a gold powder in the glue. So instead of hiding the cracks, they make a feature of the cracks. Arguably, it becomes more beautiful than it was before. Instead of being ashamed of your scars, you realize that God is working in your scars. Scars are always a place of healing, aren't they? It was interesting, my wife, she was sharing this image, which we love, Beauty from Brokenness, at the school with a load of mums. And we were talking about it, and we were talking about running a course, looking at brokenness and anxiety and all that sort of stuff. And one mum was like, yeah, my husband's had an affair, and another mum was like, yeah, I'm in so much debt. Another mum said, I'm up for coming to anything. We're like, well, we're going to pray during the course. We don't care if you're going to pray in the course. We're just up for coming. And then this other lady came up to us, and again, not a Christian, and she's an acoustic artist, whatever that is. And she gave us loads and loads of these necklaces. I don't know if you can see it there. You can probably see it on the screen. each one of them is individually made. You'll never find one the same. And the gold represents the brokenness. And she said, here, take them. They're actually really expensive in the shops, but I want you to have them for your charity and to give to people and sell them and try and get some money for help more people with brokenness, which I thought was really beautiful. And there's some key rings as well. Kintsugi is all about beauty from brokenness. Go back to our story with Teresa. Teresa is watching the TV. As she hears all the cheering and all the screaming and all the, yes, Teresa, do you know what she does? She turns the TV off, runs into a room and says, get out! She can't take it. She can't take the love that she was being shown. All the friends had to leave the party. She cried all night. You see, sometimes what happens from experiences, when you show people so much love, they just can't handle it. The love often exposes pain. It exposes anger. What is anger? Anger is an emotional response to pain. We don't hear many sermons on anger, do we? But that's what it is. It shows you that something's wrong. It shows you there's an injustice. Something is going on which you need to deal with. Some of you know, this time last year, I had a big operation on my leg. Here's my legs this time last year. And that's a good reaction. I like that. Thank you. Makes me feel tough. And I had to have limb reconstruction surgery. I've had 2 major operations. This was my first op. This was literally this time last year. And you can see there's little struts there, and they each have numbers on them. And every day, my leg had to be turned to a different number until it was straight. So it took about 6-7 weeks to make my leg straight. And we went through an incredibly tough time, and out of the first leg operation, that's when I wrote When Faith Gets Shaken, looking at really, really honestly how you keep hold of faith when everything goes pear-shaped. And it wasn't just that. I was having issues with my kids' health and all sorts of other things. This is my daughter broke her leg as well. And so we're both on Zimmer frames, and we're just about to have a Zimmer frame race down the bottom of the garden. That's my son Caleb, and apparently he won. He has 2 working legs, but anyway, that didn't seem to bother him. And I'm actually in a lot of pain. I don't know if you can see that. And it was really embarrassing going into Costa. You know, I'd come in, dong, dong, dong. Then Abigail would come in, and my wife would just look so embarrassed, as if like she chucked us both down the stairs or something. And then out of that experience, I wrote When Faith Gets Shaken, the book and the DVD. And then out of that experience, me and my friend Andy Flanagan, who is a singer-songwriter, we did this tour called When Faith Gets Shaken. And really, the whole point of it is we wanted to create a safe place for people to lament. You know, 40% of the Psalms are laments, aren't they? They're Oh, hello. So what we do is we rush people through to forgiveness, and because that's the Christian thing to do. But actually, people need to learn to lament. People need to learn to feel the pain a little bit. And you know, if we don't lament properly, we can't forgive properly. If you don't lament properly, you can't forgive properly. Think about it. Psalm 13 says this: long enough, God, you've ignored me long enough. I've looked back at your head long enough. Long enough I've carried this tongue of trouble, lived with a stomach full of pain. Long enough my arrogant enemies have looked down their noses at me. Take a good look at me, God. My God, I want to look life in the eye, so no enemy can get the best of me or laugh when I fall on my face. I've thrown myself headlong into your arms. I'm celebrating your rescue. I'm singing at the top of my lungs. I'm so full of answered prayers. David is having a time where he is feeling, God, how long? How long is this going to go on for? And I know, because I speak in so many different places, there are so many of you who are saying exactly the same thing. How long must I go on and my kids don't know Jesus? How long must I go on with this health condition? How long am I going to struggle with this mental health challenge? How long? You know, I can relate to the story of Teresa, because many, many years I hated my birthday. In fact, I'm still not keen on it, to be honest. Because the day before my birthday, when I was young, my brother died. And I was born March the 12th. He died March the 11th. And so I always thought to myself, what must my parents have gone through? You know, that one day, the death of my brother, their son. The next day, they have to celebrate a birthday. So it always ruined my birthday for me. I remember my 17th birthday party. Funny, I just couldn't handle it. I reacted exactly the same way as Teresa reacted. I did exactly the same thing. Everyone was there for me. I ran upstairs and completely and utterly lost it. I realized I've been carrying this around for so long. I realized that I've never grieved properly, even though I'm now 43 years of age. I never grieved properly for my brother who didn't make it. It's interesting, when we did the When Faith Gets Shaken tour, because we wanted to try and do something that was really inclusive in terms of response, we did this thing at the end where Andy was singing a song of lament, and we gave everyone a post-it note. And we asked people to write on it things that they've been carrying for too long. And these are just an example. I've changed them a little bit to protect people, but this is the example of some of the things that were written on those post-it notes. The guilt of being pregnant when my best friend and her husband lost their little girl on New Year's Eve. Not knowing what to say to them, put that on the cross. My sister terminally ill with cancer of liver and the pancreas. Please take her pain, her sickness, and her help for chemo. Above all, please tell her she's yours. When my mum had to suffer seizures and be in pain before, why did my mum have to suffer seizures and be in pain before she died? Why did the Lord allow that? How can I carry on without my mum? I feel empty. Another post-it note, someone wrote this: my husband is paralyzed from the neck down from an operation. I'm a single parent, carer, advocate. I'm angry that it happened despite 24-hour prayer for him. I feel dead. School is making me nervous. I'm nearly sick every morning, and I just want to know, does God love me? I hope so, because I think God could just make it a little bit better. I have a fear of growing old and the future. I need to confront my anxiety. I am too afraid to give my life to God. I don't think I'm strong enough or brave enough. You see, when people came up to us after the tour, one of the biggest issues was this issue around anxiety. And if you've ever suffered from anxiety, you'll know it feels like you're falling and you can't do anything to stop it. You're literally grabbing a hold of anything, but it's just that horrible feeling. And then if you're a Christian suffering from anxiety, do you know what then happens? You then feel guilty because everyone tells you to trust in God, as if you've never thought of that before. You know, and it comes really hard. This is a great quote, I think, this. But more than anything, anxiety is caring. It's never wanting to hurt someone's feelings. It's never wanting to do something wrong. More than anything, it's the want and the need to simply be accepted and liked. So sometimes you try too hard. Have a look at this next picture. I like this. This is anxiety. What if nobody likes me? What if I taste weird? What if I'm too cold? What if I'm too hot? What if I'm just right and I can never live up to it again? The next slide, I like this as well. The pearls of overthinking. Anyone ever done this? I've made a mistake. What do people think of me? Am I good enough? Am I doing the right job? Is this going wrong? Everyone is staring at me. Why do I bother? Why? And suddenly that inner dialogue keeps going. But you see, the thing is this. To beat anxiety, you learn to accept uncertainty. That actually life isn't always going to be certain, that sometimes you have to learn to let go. It's funny, I'm changing roles at XLP now, so after 21 years, I'm stepping aside as the CEO, and I'm going to do a different role, and I'm going to explore some other ministry options. And letting go of XLP after 21 years, I don't know if you know many founders that have done this. There's hardly any around. I'm trying to find one who can help me get through it. But suddenly, making that decision, I am confronted with my own brokenness, my own anxiety, and my own insecurity. I look at all the other speakers around, and I think, well, they're the confident ones. You know, they're the proper ones with a healing story. I'm the useless one. I'm the imposter one. I'm the one who one day is going to get found out, and maybe Bristol's my time to get found out this morning. But then I realized about a couple of months ago, the compassion I have for others, I need to start showing myself. Life happens. Jesus was more concerned about caring for the broken than how they got broken in the first place. And actually, not to be ashamed of the scars, as a scar is always a place of healing. And as I'm not ashamed of my scars, then I will release others not to be ashamed of their scars. You see, we're all broken. We're all part of getting it together. And actually, what you think disqualifies you, qualifies you to talk to other people. The amount of people that actually come to faith through the When Faith Gets Shaken show and the books and the DVDs is incredible. Because I think there's something really authentic and beautiful about someone saying, you know what, I'm broken, you're broken, but I found faith in the middle of my brokenness. Let's journey together. It's a lot nicer than going in and going, here, we want to rescue you, save you going from hell. It's nicer to actually get alongside people This is my quote. By sharing our imperfections, we become more human and more approachable. 2 Corinthians 12 talks about the thorn in the flesh, doesn't it? And there's been so much debate amongst theologians what the thorn in the flesh actually is. Some people think it's a physical condition, which Paul had. Some people think it's probably persecution that Paul was going through. The reality is we don't really know. But 3 times Paul says, please, God, will you take this away from me? And I guess if you were sort of in a meeting, you think maybe the 3rd time, that's the time he had the breakthrough. After the 3rd time, what was said to Paul? My grace is enough for you. My power comes to perfection in weakness. So I will be more pleased to boast my weakness so that the Messiah's power may rest on me. I am delighted when weak, insulted in difficulties, persecuted and facing disasters for the Messiah's sake. When I'm weak, then I am strong. One of the interesting books I read in my research for a book that I'm writing at the moment is called The Curse of the Strong. And it talks about people that suffer from depression. And the psychiatrist who wrote the book said, you know what, I can tell you the personal characteristics of 9 out of 10 people that suffer from depression. These are them. That the person that suffers from depression often has these characteristics. They're morally strong, they're reliable, diligent, strong conscience, a strong sense of responsibility, a tendency to focus on the needs of others before one's own, sensitivity, vulnerable to criticism, self-esteem dependent on the valuation of others. Does that look like a weak person to you? That's the sort of person I want as my best buddy. Just been strong for too long. Who's done this? Winston Churchill, Oliver Cromwell, Abraham Lincoln, Vincent van Gogh. None of these people got better, you know, by telling people to tell them, you better pull yourself together now. None of them got better. Overcoming anxiety, we need to learn to manage it, otherwise it manages us. The guilt that people carry around is incredible. We use these terms, I should be okay by now. I must get my life back together. I ought to be stronger. I should, I must, I ought. Ever use those terms? The inner critic says there's always something wrong with you. One of my favourite films is Good Will Hunting. And this stars Robin Williams and Matt Damon. Matt Damon is this genius, maths genius. And Robin Williams' character is a psychiatrist. And he's trying to help him deal with his past. And there's this one incredibly moving in the film where he holds his folder and he's showing Matt Damon's character pictures of someone that's been abused. He's got bruises on his back. And he turns to Matt Damon's character and goes, do you know anything about this? He's like, yeah, know quite a lot about this, actually. You? Yeah, I know quite a lot about it as well. And then they describe some of the abuse that they've had. And then Robin Williams' character looks at him and goes, see this? Not your fault. He goes, yeah, I know. He goes, no, look at me, son. It's not your fault. Like, no, you don't get it. It's not your fault. And he keeps going, and he keeps going and going until Matt Damon's character can't take it anymore, and he starts to cry. And there's lots of swear words, so I can't show it this morning. But the fact is, I've done that story so many times. I've never done a story where someone has eyes haven't filled up in tears in the audience, because people believe that stuff that happens to them is all their fault. And they carry the guilt around, and it's a killer. It's okay not to be okay. We need to be with people in our society. We need to understand what's going on. We need to change the way we do evangelism sometimes. I want to show you this little clip, and then we're going to finish in a sec. But this is a little clip that looks at the difference between empathy and sympathy. Check this out.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Interesting clip, huh? Teresa gets up in the middle of the night, and she goes back into the lounge. Her husband, who's made his bed in the study because he thought he'd better not go in, hears that she's rustling around, and she's sitting by the TV. Her husband gets up and he says, I am so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. She said to him, put it on again. He said, are you sure? Yeah, put it on again. He put the video on again, and they watched it. She turned around to her husband, and she said, you know what? Actually, I like it. Thank you. Isaiah 61, bind up the brokenhearted. You know, I often thought of that as we were praying the other day with some friends, and I often thought of that as a dirty old bandage. I don't know what image comes up when you sort of thought about the bind up brokenhearted. And said, well, maybe it's the gold. Maybe it's the scars. Maybe it's God pouring in something incredibly beautiful. You know, I realize that God wants to use the broken to bring freedom to people, the kintsugi image. Where is God? God is always in the places sometimes where the broken are. And that means he's in our communities where people are broken, but maybe also he's in the abandoned parts of myself, because our broken parts are irresistible to God. So will I go to the wounded and broken parts of me and start to hear his voice in 100 loving voices saying, go on, Patrick, you can do this. I'm cheering you on. Sheila Walsh said this, my brokenness is a better bridge for people than my pretend wholeness ever was. You know, it's funny, isn't it, church? We sing a lot of interesting songs. I remember when I was growing up, we used to sing a song that said this, I surrender all, I surrender all to Jesus, I surrender all. When I sing that, I think my life is a bit more like, I surrender some, but not part of me that's been hurt and broken. I keep that hidden from everyone else. I surrender some, but not the shame I carry because of my anxiety. I surrender some, but not my teenage daughter, because I want to control her because she's 15. I surrender some, but not my perfectionism, because it should, it must, it ought, it better be perfect. I surrender some, but not all my finances, because I need to be practical. Lord, I give you most of my heart, give you most of my soul. I live mostly for you alone. Here's the thing. You can't rescue a drowning man until they stop thrashing around. Surrender is at the heart of the Christian faith. It's saying, God, I give you all. And here's the most important point of the whole talk. You trust people the most that make you feel loved and safe. You trust people that make you feel loved and safe. Jesus knelt down. He looked the woman in the eyes that was in caught in adultery, who'd been abused by so many different men before, and then she felt loved and she felt safe. And that's why we surrender. It's because we're loved. We're loved. So my prayer is is that you would know God's voice in 100 different places, in 100 different locations, cheering you on, knowing that you're his child, that he loves you and that he cares for you.